control this?
You do.
I do? So what do I have to hit to make it start?
Just hit the top play button. There's a play button right at the top center. You have to touch it. Just have to touch
Okay, I see where it is. Okay, so can I wait 3 minutes into my talk and then do it?
Sure.
All right, now, I'm really a little bit upset because Clifford stole my whole shtick. So instead, I've got the rolly chair out here because basically what I want to talk with y'all about is the unusual title that you have there: Interstates, Toothless Rednecks, and Cultural WMDs. And you may be wondering, first of all, what exactly is a cultural WMD? Second of all, what do Interstates and Toothless Rednecks have to do with WMDs? And finally, what in the world could a podunk preacher possibly know or be able to share about the whole concept of WMD? So I feel like perhaps I am uniquely qualified to speak on the subject of WMDs, being as how I am most likely the only person here in this room today that has been directly impacted by WMDs. Did you get that? Directly impacted? Okay, no. All right, if you pay attention, you will be rewarded, okay? There will be subtle things that you may see that you may get. Now, you may wonder, what exactly do you mean just to say that you have been directly impacted? Let me first of all tell you this, okay? I am a child of the PD, all right? I born, reared right here in this area and in this community. And when I say that I am a child of the PD, just so you understand, my family has been in this region since 1740 at least. And I know this because one of my cousins has written an extensive family history in 3 volumes with a separate index that he charges family members $300 so that they can buy a copy of it. And I'm too cheap, I only bought 1 copy of it. But it was enough for me to look into that book and to actually find my family members going all the way back to 1740, the recording of the marriage of my 5 times great grandfather. And it also allowed me to see the points where my mom's family and my dad's family actually met in holy matrimony before my mom and my dad actually met, which doesn't do much to dispel the stereotype of a southern boy with a family stick instead of a family tree. So, don't hold that against me yet, but I just want you to know that that book wasn't necessarily a complete shock, because when we would go together to the large family reunions where we would actually get to meet our sister cousins and brother cousins and aunt cousins and uncle cousins who were kind of interrelated. How many of y'all are from this area? Okay, all right. So, and he doesn't find this funny. We're probably kin. Well, I digress. Now, what in the world could a southern boy from the PD region possibly know or have to say about weapons of mass destruction? And I want you to know that when I talk about weapons of mass destruction, I'm not just talking about gas. I'm not just talking about a letter with some dust on it. I'm talking about the big mamma jamma of all weapons of mass destruction, what's the biggie? The nuclear bomb. The nuclear bomb. How many of you are aware that on March 11th, 1958, a nuclear bomb was dropped right here in the PD area? Did y'all know that? How many of you were aware of that? How many of you have ever heard of that? In Mars Bluff, South Carolina, a nuclear bomb was dropped. Okay? Now, and when I say that this nuclear bomb was dropped, I want you to know that we're not talking about a little tiny thing. I mean, we're talking about a big, ginormous nuclear weapon that, fortunately, the nuclear warhead was not armed. And when I say dropped, I mean that the bomb was very large, it was very heavy, it shifted in the plane as they were flying over Mars Bluff, and the bomb bay door began to come open, and somebody yelled to the bombardier, "Hey, come back here and help me. This bomb is big, it's huge, and something's about to happen." To which the bombardier literally goes to the back of the airplane and says, "You grab this pin like this," and I believe that the actual recording of the transcript is Oh, damn, I dropped the thing. Some of y'all have been past there, and you didn't even know it. How many of you, in searching for I-95 or trying to find a way to get around Florence, have ever turned off of Highway 76 there at DuPont, Smurfett Stone, going down the little road past Roche Pharmaceutical International? How many of you have ever done that? Okay, when you're driving down that road, you will drive past Mars Bluff, South Carolina, the place where the bomb without the nuclear warhead armed fell. And while the nuclear warhead was not armed, the 7,600 pounds of TNT was definitely armed and led to an explosion that created a crater 75 feet across and 35 feet deep. It destroyed the home of Walter Gregg. It damaged Mizpah Baptist Church. And it cracked and caused structural damage in every building within a 5-mile radius. Now, the home of Walter Gregg, the family of Walter Gregg has the unique distinction of being maybe the only family in the PD area that had the opportunity to provide a fork to my family stick, but somehow or another, none of our people were lucky enough to marry him. So when I say that I was directly impacted by a weapon of mass destruction, maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration, but I was indirectly impacted because my grandfather did actually have a pond and a fishing shack over there that he and some of the guys would go over to, and it was severely impacted by the explosion of the TNT. So that's how this whole concept of weapons of mass destruction comes into being. But what is a cultural weapon of mass destruction? Well, if you drive down past Mars Bluff, you will see one. I-95. I-95 is a weapon of cultural mass destruction. Now, I'm not trying to say that I blame the Eisenhower interstate system, okay? But what I am simply trying to say, okay, and stay with me on this, all right? Don't try to figure out where this is going, because I'm not 100% sure that I know. Just at the end, know that some of this will actually wind up tying together. And it will have something to do with toothless rednecks that are not my relatives. Okay? But even my South Carolina education will tell me that if my family has been in this region since the 1740s, then my family would have been present and most likely, depending on how long and large the yellow streak was, involved in the American Revolutionary War, as well as the
Civil War.
No, wrong. No, it was a trick question, and I'm sorry for setting you up because let me tell you why. Let me see if I can tell you why. A civil war is a war that takes place within one country where there are two factions that are fighting to gain control of the central government. The war between the states that we had actually involved, legitimate or not, two governments, two independently elected sets of government officials, two currencies that had been established, one of them worth money and the other that would shortly be used for toilet paper. But anyway, that's a fine distinction for those of us who are from around here. We prefer to call it the war between the states. Because there actually were two governments. One was a failed government. Perhaps there were some really bad ideas that was built upon. But my family would have been here during the war between the states, and my great-great-great-grandfather, General Beauregard Hunter Campbell, was in charge actually of keeping Yankees, no offense intended, out of the state of Florida, in which he did a very, very, very good job. But after the war was over and he left, Miami fell within a week. It began to back up there in Florida. And we're glad y'all are here now. But let's face it, I-95 is a pipeline. The first thing they began doing when they built I-95 was they piped a great portion of the population of New York City down into South Florida. And it backed up and it spilled over into the debtors' colony that we know as the state of Georgia. Nobody really wanted to live there, and that's why the people began to jump from Florida back up into the lower part of South Carolina. Okay? And I became aware of this the other day as I was listening to my younger son speak. And I turned to my wife, listening to my 5-year-old son talk, and I said, "That boy sounds like he's from Michigan." Where does he get that? Because cultures grow and change. Cultures consume one another. Cultures assimilate one another. And there was a sense of sadness as I watch it, as I listened to both of my children, because I did not hear the beauty of the language that I grew up with. Now, being a Southern boy, all right, let me just tell you, okay, being a Southern boy, I love the sound of a Southern accent. And some of my family's from over around Orangeburg, they got a completely different accent. I grew up working in the restaurants along the Grand Strand, and I won't break out my gullah for you, but I could actually understand most of what was being said in the kitchen. And if you've ever been caught in the middle of a gullah conversation, you will know that, first of all, it is a complete separate language. Second of all, they don't use all of the words that they need to use when they communicate. They do a lot by just doing this. I don't know exactly how they do it, but I began to be able to pick up on that. But it was a little bit disconcerting for me to know that my boys will not have that same type of conversation and language that I do. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not so provincial that I'm upset about some of the growth and the changes and the advantages that things have happened as cultures, as foreigners, and cultures have come down into the PD area. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty excited about it, but it left me a bit angry the other day. As I'm standing out in my yard, and I'm having a conversation with Boston Petey. He's my neighbor. He's not my neighbor who lives beside me. He's my neighbor who lives down the street a couple of blocks and then over a couple of blocks. But Boston Petey is standing there in my yard. He's having a conversation, and I call him Boston Petey, not because his name is P-E-T-E-Y, but because before his life began down here in Myrtle Beach, he was a policeman in the state of Massachusetts, in the city of Boston, working in the PD. Thank you. Very good. So, those who pay attention will be rewarded. So I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Boston PD. Sir?
I thought maybe you moved from Boston to the PD.
Well, there you go. See, that would work as well, too. No, he worked in the PD up in Boston, as he informed me the other morning. And he and I are having this conversation because my neighbor, Boston PD, who happens to live down this way, all right, as I'm standing in my yard. Y'all can't see my house, but I'm standing in my yard, and he lives down this way. He's upset about my neighbor, the Toothless Redneck, who lives down this way. Because the Toothless Redneck has a problem with the bottom, the sauce. He likes to go rolling, drinking gin and juice. You know what I mean? Okay. Now, and whether or not this is an inherited characteristic that gets transmitted to his kids, or whether it's something that they have learned from watching closely and mimicking Dad, we may never know. But Boston PD is upset because the Toothless Redneck's son, one of his sons, happened to get filled up with some of that stuff and come tearing through the neighborhood about 4:30 in the morning, taking out a series of mailboxes. And in my neighborhood, mailboxes are sacrosanct because they must all be the same color, make, model, size, height, and installed the exact amount of, because I live in a resort. Which is basically code and language for people who are unhappy with the places that they used to live, so they packed up all of their belongings and their miseries, and they moved down together so they could share them with us. So Boston PD is talking to me, and he's telling me about how great things used to be in Massachusetts and in Boston, and how bad things are here, and how backward the culture is. No offense meant to you. I'm holding my tongue, I'm biting down on my tongue with all that I can as he's continuing to rail against my Toothless Redneck neighbor down here. And what's happening here, and I'm doing a pretty good job of holding myself together, okay? I'm doing a pretty good job of not feeling like I have to defend my home, like not feeling like I have to defend my state, my region, my town. Until he begins to talk about, because he wasn't even impacted by Toothless Redneck's son, until he begins to talk about the person who lives, not in our neighborhood resort, but over behind him, because the neighbor that lives over behind him has a very distressing habit of burning tires. Now, nobody enjoys the aroma of burning tires wafting through the fall air. It just doesn't have the same. But here's the thing. Somehow or another, Boston PD, as he's moved and transplanted into a new culture, seems to assume that he has the ability to change people who don't live in his community because he doesn't like the way that they live. Now, the truth of the matter is the tire burning guy who lives over behind Boston PD, yeah, he needs to do some things to be considerate of those who are living around him. Yeah, he probably needs to change his habits, and he's probably not being very eco-friendly in the burning of rubber. But the only thing that I keep thinking as I'm doing that is that I wish that Boston PD knew some of the things that I know. You see, the resort that I live on is right off of a street that's called Freewoods Road. I don't think Boston PD knows the meaning of any of y'all ever heard of Freewoods Road? Do you know the history of Freewoods Road? Do you know what it means? I'm trying to find complete 100% confirmation, but apparently Freewoods Road is the place where, well, the woods on Freewoods Road were called the Freewoods Road. We're called the Free Woods because this was the place where, if a slave could get away from a plantation and make it back into those woods, and they were at a distance and a place where they could live free. And the culture that comes in and begins to buy and assimilate, the culture that has already been there, doesn't know or understand or appreciate what the significance of the homeland for the people who are already there. I mean, let's face it, I bought a little postage stamp piece of land and a little tiny piece of house as my first home. We built our first home there. Paid a price that couple of decades ago, somebody could have purchased hundreds of acres of land for. The people who used to live there had no idea, except maybe they did. Because as I drive out Freewoods Road and as I go down to the church where I pastor, or as I go to the school to pick up my children, I drive past the house, the mobile home, where this lady lives. And she and her family, on a large tract of land, where presumably the Southern Evacuation Lifeline would go right through the middle. She's living in a mobile home that is a little bit outdated, probably could use a little bit of love. And she's sitting on a chunk of land that's worth millions of dollars. And someone in her background had the wisdom and the foresight, or the inability to grow and change, to cling to a way of life that was outmoded and outdated, that made it so that this land can only belong to her and her family. It can never be sold to someone else for gain or profit. It's one of the battles that our new culture that's forming down here faces as we try to bring in the Southern Evacuation Lifeline. A land that her forebears were concerned that she may not realize the importance of the property that she belongs to. And knowing that anyone else who moved into it would not understand the importance of the property that she belonged to. Wanted to make sure, like those people in Oklahoma, she would know that she belonged to the land as much as the land belonged to her. Now, to close, I simply want to say, we are creating a new culture that will be important for us to engage in dialogue and conversation, and not to rant and rail against those who are different. And just to show you how easy it is for us to get sidetracked. My toothless redneck neighbor that Boston PD is railing against, he is from Michigan. Y'all thought he was a